Tim Tant, thanks for coming in today, man.
Thanks, Gary.
So, for anybody that may not know, we're friends, we hang out, but we've got very opposing worldviews. So, tell everybody, didn't you just complete some courses?
I did. I just completed a Master's of Biblical Apologetics.
Well, that's more than just a course. I mean,
Yeah.
that's okay. You got a master's.
Yeah,
Okay, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, is this your second master's?
it is. Let's see, I got
Okay, so you
master's,
got two masters.
I do.
And what are they in again?
The first one is in healthcare administration.
Okay. All right, so
So-
that's your day-to-day work.
Pretty boring.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so that's your day-to-day.
Yeah, and the biblical apologetics one, I don't even like tell people at work I'm just doing that because it was just I have explained it to people, but it's kind of like a hobby. And
Okay.
it was, I mean, theology, apologetics,
Yeah.
polemics is a hobby. It's a major way I spend my time.
Right.
And not everybody, it's kind of an odd thing, like, oh, what do you do on the weekends? Like, oh, well, I try to learn about hard things, explain the Bible, and I try to learn about why other worldviews are wrong. And that's kind of a deep thing for the office sometimes,
Yeah, it's not exactly a water cooler type conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I did that. Yeah, I did that second degree, and really enjoyed it. It was my hobby time.
Yeah.
I like to read that stuff anyways, and I enjoyed kind of putting some structure around some of the things I was studying. So
Okay. And then you're involved in a number of different ministries, right?
yeah, on Sunday mornings I teach along with two other men, 11th and 12th grade boys, like Sunday school class,
Yeah.
along with a couple of college age guys hang around in that too. I've got a ministry called Conversations with Christians.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got my little logo on the
Yeah.
coffee cup. There's a website, conversationswithchristians.org. It's got a small blog on there, and it's just kind of an outlet for me to write about some things, to share some resources I find helpful, and then a YouTube channel too.
But the Conversations with Christians, it's more than just your a blog where you write about stuff. I mean, you go out
Yeah,
in public with.
I do. Maybe I should have started with that because I don't really consider myself like a YouTuber or even a blogger because I do it pretty infrequently and I don't have a good cadence. That's a goal for this year, is to get into better cadence. But my favorite thing to do is to go out here in Nashville in Centennial Park and set up a table, and on the front of the table it says Conversations with Christians. And so that's evangelism. That's what I like to do. When we go out there and we invite people to have discussions on Christianity and Jesus, and usually, I'm not out there to ruin anybody's day. I'm not blocking anybody on the sidewalk. I'll set up the table kind of off to the side. And as people walk by on the sidewalk, I will just say, hey, man, what do you think about Jesus? And sometimes people stop and talk, and sometimes they keep on walking, and that's totally fine. But out there in Centennial Park, you get people from all over the country and all over the world, really, because the Nashville is such a tourist spot, and so is the Parthenon there in the park.
Oh, yeah.
So you get to have conversations with, people from all different kinds of worldviews.
Yeah.
But that is kind of like the main thing I like to do.
Yeah.
Like Sunday school with those guys, that's important too. But in terms of like just my own time, is that.
Okay. And you're not out there screaming at people, you're going to hell if you don't, you're not like the guy right outside the baseball games, with the big sign just screaming at people.
No, I'm not. I have open air preached before, and I think it can be done well, and I think it can be done poorly.
I was kind of using that as an extreme example.
No, I know.
And then you're like, no, I've done that.
I've never done it. No, I've never done it with like a megaphone outside a baseball game, that kind of thing. But I have for a few minutes said what I wanted to say out loud in front of a group of strangers before.
Okay.
That's called open air evangelism.
Okay.
It's not. I think there's some people that are good at it. There's people that are bad at it. There's people that shouldn't be doing it. It's not what I'm good at.
Okay.
It's not what I'm good at.
You're better at the one-on-one conversation.
I prefer that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, and another thing that you're involved in here in Nashville, which is where I get to spend time with you, and I really enjoy it, is the Conversation Coalition.
Yeah.
So tell everybody about that.
So we just we just crossed our 1 year mark
Mm-hmm.
since our first event, and it started as this team of atheists and Christians, and it's still that, coming together to have hard discussions and kind of model how we can have those hard discussions. And
Right.
so it's kind of multifaceted, but I think that's our shared mission, really, as Christians and atheists. Like we can come together and like, hey, we want people to do this and to do it well. And so we've been coming together now for a year, once a month, most months, uh, discussing different topics, encouraging dialogues, challenging each other,
Yeah.
and talking about the hard things in kind of like a public forum.
Yeah. So, and you and I are both founding members of that.
That sounds so distinguished.
Well, it's where we met.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it does sound distinguished. It's basically just a group of people that um, really like to have the hard discussions.
Uh-huh.
That I describe it as we have the hard discussions that most people avoid, and we don't avoid them. We schedule them.
Yeah.
And I remember asking this question early on. We were we were having one of our meetings and organizing this thing, and I think it was after maybe our first or second event, and we were having our little our post event meeting, and I basically said, look, I know why I'm here and I know why I'm excited about this because I actively want to challenge these worldviews.
Uh-huh.
But man, what's in it for the Christians? Like, why would
Yeah.
why do you come for that? Why would you constantly put yourself up for
Yeah.
critique this way? And I think you had a pretty good answer. But if somebody asked you that today, Tim, why do you get together with these atheists all the time and they're constantly trying to challenge your worldview? What's up with that?
I don't remember exactly. I remember that conversation. I don't remember exactly what I said, except for the fact that, hey, I can't hide the fact that I want people to know Jesus. That's point A for me, and I'm not ashamed of that. But also, I want to demonstrate to other Christians that the Christian worldview can reasonably be defended.
Mm,
That it is a reasonable faith, and that's it's an important part of my faith journey too. When I realized that,
yeah.
so I don't remember if that's what I said. It was I want people to know Jesus, but then I also want like the overall mission to people to see that we can come together, have these conversations, still shake hands,
Hmm.
and still vehemently disagree over some major issues,
Yeah.
and still live as neighbors and friends.
Right.
You know?
Well, your answer back then was very, very similar to that.
Okay.
What I remember you saying was, look, I get that your motivation is you want to challenge these ideas. Well, I'd be lying to you if I told you that my motivation was anything other than I want people to know Jesus.
Yeah.
And this is a way of, doing that. Hopefully
Well, that's
on my side, you said, hopefully on my side, through these conversations, somebody will get curious about the gospel and they'll learn something here. They'll go home, they'll dig more into it. Hopefully, through these conversations, I'm able to lead somebody to Jesus.
Yeah.
That's my motivation.
and that's why I go out to the park. It's not. I mean, I have a good time while doing it,
Hmm.
but it can be a hard thing.
Yeah, because people aren't always kind.
No, they're not. They're not, but man, there's a lot of different angles onto that. But I do always enjoy it. And we can get into this more. But I believe the Christian worldview is true, and so there are implications with that. And because I believe the Christian worldview is true, and which means I believe in things like heaven and hell and the gospel and faith and all that stuff. I want to see people saved. I want to see people know Jesus,
Hmm.
and so that drives my evangelism. And otherwise, I mean, I could take that time and be home with my family. And again, I'm not saying I have a bad time while I'm doing it, but I'm saying like that's what drives me to get out there because, man, I get butterflies. Like when I'm getting ready to go out to the park or we're getting ready to go on the stage with the Conco or whatever,
Hmm.
I get butterflies. I get nervous. I'm like, man, do I really want to be doing this? But I remind myself, no, man, this is important. Like if I really believe what I believe, this is an important thing for me to be doing. This is important. I want to see people know Jesus,
Yeah.
come to know Jesus. And so I always get nervous, but at the end, no matter how the conversations go, no matter how many times I got to share the gospel with somebody, I always walk out of there and I'm like, man, I glorified God today. And that gives me I get this peace about it. And that's really satisfying.
Yeah. Well, and just so everybody knows the kind of the links that you go in some of these conversations, I'll just give everybody a clear picture of, say, who you're sitting down with today.
Sure.
For me,
Yep.
I'm not just agnostic. I don't know if there's a God, and I'm not even. I mean, day to day, yeah, I consider myself an atheist, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes that can be a little bit light for me in that
Mm.
a lot of people say, well, atheist is just somebody that's not convinced, that there's no God. And that doesn't quite drive the point home for me good enough. And so more often than not, I consider myself to be an anti-theist. In other words, I'm actively opposed to these ideas. And I think they're harmful. I think they do real harm in people's lives. I know you would say that they don't have to. That's not always. There's people that have it changes their life and makes all fine. But yeah, I'm actively opposed to these things, and so I'll look for opportunities to challenge these beliefs. I scrutinize the validity of some of the claims. I stand in full opposition,
Yeah.
and somehow you and I and others
Mhm.
gather for these conversations and actively challenge each other's. And you guys challenge us also with, okay, well, if you don't believe this, let's see what atheism has to offer the world.
Yeah.
Let's see what explanations it has for the origins and this kind of stuff. And a lot of atheists tend to dodge those things, I feel like, and say, well, if somebody tells you they're an atheist, that doesn't tell you anything else about them. It doesn't tell you their politics. It doesn't tell you their beliefs. Someone could not believe in evolution and at the same time still be an atheist.
Oh, sure.
So there's a wide variety. So you can't lump us all in one thing. I tend to want to accept the baggage, and just because I enjoy the conversations and I want to move into that. So when somebody says, no, atheism comes with its own baggage also, it comes baked in are these other claims, for lack of a better term. And I say, okay, fine, lay it on me. What do you
Yeah.
think atheism has to. But yeah, we gather for these conversations, and we go out to dinners. I think the last dinner that we had was four of us, two believers, two atheists. I think it was me, you, Elliot, and
Oh,
Pedro.
yeah.
And that was 4 hours.
That was crazy, man.
And I know I got up there and I had no idea that we'd just blown 4 hours because
it always just goes that way. Same things when we've. I told my wife when I got home, and I was like, "Well, we went to Fat Bites this time, which was great because they don't close till like 2 or 3 in the morning or something crazy."
Yeah.
I was like, "But when you and I have met in the past at the cigar bar, they close at 8 o'clock." And I
Right.
was like, maybe we needed that, like that hard stop, because I told my wife, I was like, "Hey, I'll be home at 9." It was like 10:30. Maybe I said 8:30, but it was like 10:30 by the time we were
Yeah.
rolling out of there.
Yeah. But that was a great conversation.
Yeah,
We
it
got
was.
into some really good things and challenged each other.
Mhm.
So, all right. So there's been a lot going on
Yeah.
here lately, and you've made a few posts about various things.
Yeah. So in terms of like political and current events, I try not to post on my Facebook. I say try. I think I do a good job. I'm not posting about them very
Mhm.
often, but I did this week. If that's
Sure.
that's where we're going.
Yeah. So in the news has been the Olympics.
Yeah.
For a couple of different
Yeah.
incidents.
Yeah.
The opening ceremonies.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So everybody made a big fuss that it was mocking Christianity.
Uh-huh.
What's your take?
I did not comment on that. Not on Facebook.
I
But
thought you put the picture up there, or
mm-mm.
you didn't?
Nope. I did not. Not at the opening ceremonies.
Okay.
But
The Last Supper thing?
yeah, I didn't comment on that.
Okay. All right.
But I mean, I do.
Would you've seen the controversy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
It does seem it's been so muddied because I think some people were saying that, oh, it was like the blue guy that was dressed up there is represented some Greek god or something, and but then there were other people, like I think the person that had the halo and stuff coming off her head
mhm.
did acknowledge that it was supposed to represent an interpretation of the Last Supper or something like that. So of course I don't believe that God should be mocked, or that could be seen as a mockery of God.
Well, those are two different things.
The God, okay,
So you said I don't think that God should be mocked,
sure.
or that this incident should be seen as a mockery. Those are two different.
Oh, were they doing it? So I don't know what drove the motivation of the people that put it together. But I would say at its heart, it did represent something contrary to the Christian worldview. So whether or not they said,
So at first glance, I'm like, I'm okay with that. Like if somebody said,
Yeah.
um, there was a play or a performance or whatever, and it contradicted the Muslim worldview. I'm like, okay, big deal.
Mm.
So if somebody
Well,
did something that contradicted the Christian
well, it's
worldview,
something people that do stuff that contradicts the Christian worldview all the
that's what I'm
time.
saying.
I mean, I do stuff that contradicts the worldview. It's called sin. That's why,
Okay,
you know. So I don't think the outrage or the outcry was that they did something that contradicted the worldview. I think it's they took what would be the most sacred aspect of the Christian worldview. Now, the Last Supper is just a painting that somebody made.
sure.
The painting represented a biblical event, and so they seems to be that somebody took a depiction of a biblical event
Hmm.
and turned it into that. That was, and so
Mm.
I get it. I get the outrage. I'm not saying that we should have laws on the books that make that illegal. Um,
Right.
but I also see it and I say, hey, that's something that ought not happen.
Okay.
But I can say that without saying that there needs to be legislation against it or
Sure. Sure. So I learned a lot this week
okay.
because if I just watched the opening ceremonies and particularly that thing, it was odd to me. It's definitely not something you see every day. And so I don't know that I would have caught the Last Supper
Hmm.
thing because it was so fast, right? It was people wandering and doing this and
Yeah.
this guy's
I haven't even watched it.
this guy's
Yeah.
coming out and he's kind of dancing or doing this, and then the camera pans and for a split second, if you pause the TV right
Yeah.
there, then you get this image, and then it moves on to something else. So my first look at this was somebody with that freeze frame with the Last Supper near it, and they were comparing the two, and I thought, that's interesting. I knew nothing about Dionysus or what he was the god of.
Yeah.
I actually hadn't even thought that much about the fact that Olympia was the home of all these gods, that the Olympics it goes directly traces back to all of these Greek
Hmm.
gods and
Yeah.
and competitions and this and so after digging into that a little bit, I'm like, oh well, obviously they're doing this moment to dedicate to all these Greek gods. This one in particular, this is in France, and so it's very artistic and flamboyant and
Mhm.
all this stuff. Okay, fine. And then there's this one group of people, not the Muslims or the Hindus or the Buddhists, but particularly the Christians
Well, sure.
that are pissed because it's
There
this.
were upset Muslims about it too,
Okay, all right, because they revere
as a
Jesus
prophet, as
as
an
a
important
prophet, just
prophet.
not as
Yeah.
the Messiah or.
Mhm.
So, so I had to learn about all those things, and then also people started coming out with, well, there's been a lot of people that have um, mimicked the image of the Last Supper,
Mhm.
The Simpsons, House, Battlestar Galactica.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
oh yeah, I mean, if you there's these
That's just made by Mormons, by the way.
right,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't know that. But there's a dozen or so
Uh-huh.
at least.
Yeah.
The Sopranos, had their own image that looked like, the
Yeah.
Last Supper with all the gangsters gathered around and all this. So people have always done this, and nobody got pissed off any of those times.
Mm,
But you let drag queens do it,
mm.
now we're gonna have a problem.
Yeah. I would say the Christians would have a problem with it at any time. Well, it's not like the painting of the Last Supper itself is like this sacred image that like should not be violated,
Right,
but it's not like people mock Christianity all the time. It's true. I mean, they do it, right?
right.
Yeah, South Park does it all. Any and in any of the descriptions you made,
Hmm.
and so it's almost like what else is new? Like, okay, they do it all the time. I'm still going to say they shouldn't do it. Because I believe, think about my worldview. I believe that Jesus is God, that God is righteous and holy, and He ought to be revered, and therefore He shouldn't be mocked in these ways. But there's a cultural sense where it happens so often that it almost doesn't
Mm,
bother me. Now, perhaps it should. Perhaps it should. But then when it happens on the world stage, like you're gonna get more of a response than
yeah.
if it happened on an HBO special or was Sopranos HBO?
Hmm.
Yeah, or The Simpsons or South Park.
Yeah.
I'm sure South Park has countless episodes where they with Jesus characters and stuff showing up on there. But
I mean, with the things that Christianity and the Christian um, community says about various groups of people.
Hmm.
Do you think that they ought to have a little bit thicker skin and be able to take some? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I think everybody should have thick skin.
well, I'm just saying because they essentially they say, hey, if you're not in agreement with my worldview, if you don't think that my God is the creator of the universe, the savior, all these things, you're going to burn in hell for eternity,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
And a lot of Christians will point to a lot of other people who think of themselves as believers and say, no, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it, the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
even sometimes Catholics,
Sure.
oh no, none of y'all are doing it wrong. You're all going to hell. My God is the only way. That's some fairly provocative things to say
Oh yeah. No,
to
it's
large swaths of the population, then to get upset when that belief is mocked or criticized in some way seems a bit thin-skinned or arrogant,
yeah.
and
Well,
so that seemed to be the response. And then when they know nothing about Dionysus, the Greek gods, what these festivals represented, they know nothing about art and expression and all of these things. They come across as thin-skinned and a bit ignorant.
but would you say we're thin skinned? So you gave a lot of examples about how we don't get upset, right? Would you
True?
say we're being
True.
thick skinned in those situations and perhaps thinned in this one?
Hmm.
So
I
it seems to me that like Christianity as a group um, tolerates it a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, but then there does seem to be like a line that was crossed in this sense that really riled people up.
With the drag queens.
Yeah, and I think probably that it's because that's such a flashpoint in our culture right now.
Well, and it was also nearly nude people. So that goes into the whole sexuality,
Mm,
whether or not it was, I mean, it could have just been a bunch of men and women up there,
yeah,
but
I bet it wouldn't have gotten the same outrage. I mean, the drag queen thing that is a flashpoint
that
in our
that that was the
culture,
line that
and
got
so I think
crossed.
it's probably I mean, it's an interesting thought exercise to really consider why did this one. You give a lot of examples. Why did this one rile people up so much?
Mhm.
And I think it's because drag culture, trans issues, sexuality is a major flashpoint in our culture right now.
Right.
And so that intermingle, they use that with Christian imagery. It seems to be a major mockery of the Christian worldview by
Right.
using what is already a tenacious
So you
topic.
think do you think that someone could have recreated that, but with strippers and strippers and
No,
Chippendale dancers,
see, I
and
think
it not quite pissed them off quite as bad?
no. I mean
I mean, because
that's
you're
sexuality.
right, but it's not the drag queen. It's not homosexuality,
Yeah.
and it's
No.
not.
Well, if like on the Olympics open ceremony, I think there would have been maybe the same amount of outrage of it.
Okay, even if the drag queen thing wasn't a part of it, because I get what you're saying.
Uh-huh.
That right there is a big flashpoint. There's all this conversation these days about trans people,
Mhm.
drag queens. What is a woman? What is a
Yeah.
man? There's all this controversy right now, and so when they took that and then coupled it with an image of a depiction of the Last Supper,
Uh-huh.
and you combine those two, now that's where people really have problems.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could see that.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I tend to be the contrarian,
Mhm.
so if somebody says the reason this happened is because of this, I'll think, okay, well, let's explore it a little bit. Are you saying that it wouldn't have happened if X, Y, and Z?
I mean, on the other hand, like it doesn't surprise me that like it's almost like I almost want to say, of course it happened. Of course, you've got a non-believing world that that there is a major tension between what Christians believe and what others believe, which is always the case between things that are true and things that are not, or people that there's a lot of ways to be wrong and only one way to be right. Uh, just general truth standard. Um, and so
Say
I
that
said there's a
again.
lot of ways to be wrong, but only one way to be right. So like
Okay.
I'm either holding this pen in my hand
Hmm.
or I'm not. You could so I'm holding this pen. You could say I'm holding a cup in my hand. I would be wrong. I'm holding a hammer in my hand. I would be wrong. There's only one thing I'm actually holding in my hand,
Right.
and that's a pen. And so that I'm just saying is truth. And I don't think we should be offended. I think you do a good job, and that's why we're able to have these conversations at not getting offended when I say, "Hey, I believe this is true, and therefore you are wrong," or you say this is true, and therefore I am wrong. But of course, people are going to mock Christianity. Of course,
Okay.
and I'm not gonna try to pass legislation to prohibit it.
Hmm.
There are some Christians out there that think we should, I'm open to that discussion, but generally that's not where I stand. I want to see culture changed by sharing the gospel,
Right.
and I think you can see this by what I go out and do. If I want culture to stop mocking Christianity,
Hmm.
I'm going to accomplish that. I want to accomplish that by the proclamation of the gospel, by seeing people come to faith in Jesus, not by passing laws from the top down that prohibit it and that enforce Christian behavior, but that people have that there's an individual change from an individual that becomes Christian and then no longer desires that, and to eventually maybe there's enough people that we don't see it happening anymore because
Right.
enough people are Christian.
So you wouldn't tell them that they're you wouldn't ban them from doing something like that. You
I
just say,
wouldn't ban it. Now I will. So I'm not going to ban it, but I will at the same time say they ought not do it.
sure, sure.
But I'm not saying that I'm going to put them in jail for it.
Right, right, right.
You know?
You can say I vehemently disagree, but at the same time, I'll fight for your right to be able to do it. But I don't think you should.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a free speech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
All right.
I'm not gonna. Yeah.
Was that pushing it too far?
No.
That you would fight for their right to be
Well,
able
no, I
to,
just
even though you disagree with it?
I was just kind of I was like, oh, I want to be careful with this statement. Like, I don't
Like,
want to.
would I?
Like, I don't want to go out and be like, oh yeah, you should mock the last stuff. I'm not
Right.
gonna do that.
No. But defending their right to do it is different than saying that they should.
Yeah, from a government policy,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, there's plenty of views that I disagree with.
Yeah.
But I'm a very big proponent of free speech
Uh-huh.
and open inquiry and critical thinking. And so
Yep.
I may strongly disagree with somebody, but I'm not going to say that they can't.
Yeah.
Say that thing.
Yeah.
I could easily say telling somebody that you probably shouldn't, or you better watch your back if you do, because you're going to piss off a lot of people.
Now, even with as much as people got riled up, you would have to admit that there are other religious worldviews that have thinner skin and are
Sure.
much quicker to react to
definitely.
blasphemy and things like that.
Oh, well, the situation a few years ago in Denmark with the cartoons and the Muslim people getting so offended, and nobody coming to that newspaper's defense, and they were actually physically attacked afterwards.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that there's other worldviews that are much more take much more offense. Let's say.
Yeah.
So All right. So the boxing match.
Yep.
All right. You got some views on?
I did post about this.
You did post.
I did post about this. I did post a screenshot about that, and I will admit the situation is complex.
Very.
The post that I made, and I was surprised at how many comments it got on it. Yeah, I think my post already has like 30 comments or something, which is a lot for my Facebook page.
Sure.
So people are feeling very strongly about it.
On both ways, or
I mean, I think I got
skewed either way.
Yeah, there's more. I got more comments that were in agreement with me. So all I said was that the world should be outraged. That was my initial feedback.
Mhm.
And I think most of the comments I got. Now my friends list is probably going to be a little biased. My personal
Sure.
friends list.
Yeah.
there's going to be more people on there. Well, probably. I mean, I've had my Facebook page for a while, since before I was really a professing Christian. But the comments I got were in agreement with me.
Sure.
Now I will say, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just gonna say I did not comment on it. I politely, reserved my comments because I'm like, I'm going to be getting Tim in the studio on Saturday. So
there we go. We'll hash it out there.
Yeah.
All right. So you want me to tell you why I?
Tell me your thoughts on it.
Okay. So Caliph, if I'm saying that name right,
Okay.
I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, is not transgender.
Correct.
Is not transgender, as far as I know. And one of the reasons it's so great is because we're talking about like specific medical history, which is secret is not the good word, but protected. Like the boxing associations where Caliph has participated before cannot just release this information.
Sure.
And so that adds some challenge to the discussion. But Caliph is not a trans person, and a lot of people misunderstand that.
Yeah. A lot of people say, "Look at that! There's a boxing match, and there's a man in there boxing a woman."
Yep.
That's not the case.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
hang on a second.
Okay. You disagree? Oh, nice.
So as far as I know, that Caliph has been raised female as a woman since birth. I mean, so this wasn't a situation where somebody was in high school, decided for whatever reason that they were not their
Yeah, it's
the
not
gender or sex that they were assigned a person. Not what we generally think of a transgender identity issue or something like that.
right. It's not a guy that decided, you know what, I'm going to be a girl and then I'm going to go compete in girl
Now,
sports.
I just want to say I could be wrong about anything that I'm going to say here.
Sure,
As far
sure,
as
me too.
but as far as I know, Caliph was born with something called differential sex diagnosis, and that means individuals that are born with that often have female genitalia that forms, but their underlying chromosomes are XY,
Mhm.
which means that they would biologically be male. And they've got male testes. They don't have a womb. They don't usually have ovaries, but those testes develop inside of the body. So, from all from medically observable situations, it would appear this person, I'm not saying this is exactly what Caliph has because we just don't know,
Mhm.
has a vagina. And
Mhm.
what was interesting as I was reading this is that this is often not even diagnosed until somebody that is 7, 8 years old,
Mhm.
sometimes a teenager,
Mhm.
because the symptoms or the evidence of it doesn't come forth until someone starts experiencing puberty.
Mhm.
And so, as far as I understand it, Kelev was born with XY chromosomes,
Mhm.
which would genetically make Kelev male. But it's possible that the doctors and Kelev's family did not even know that Kelev has XY chromosomes until much later in life. So, the reason I don't think Kelev should be participating in the women's boxing tournament is because Kelev has XY chromosomes, means that Kelev has benefits has male traits that would give Kelev an advantage over biologically female opponents.
I agree that's a challenging situation.
Yeah,
And what do you do with athletes that are this, you know?
man. So I empathize with. Like, I cannot imagine the challenges that Kelev had to live with in this. It sounds horrible, like to have to live with something like that. Or,
Right.
I can't imagine becoming a teenager and you realize that your chromosomes and the puberty that you're going through is not with what you were assigned with at birth. And I know assigned at birth is again, I'm not trying to get into the whole trans conversation. This is literally a situation, it's indisputable, where they looked at this baby and said, baby's female,
Mhm.
was being raised as female, but then it turned out the genetics behind this child ended up being contrary to what the doctors believed
Right.
at birth. And
It's
so,
it's so interesting, and I'm really glad. I hate this situation has happened between both of these
yeah,
athletes, all that, but at the same time, I'm glad that the conversation now is taking place. Until this happened, so there's another condition, probably associated with what do you call it, DSD?
DSD,
Yeah.
yeah, differential sex diagnosis.
Okay. There's another, this may be like I said, associated or part of it or in that category. I'm not sure, but it's called Swyer syndrome.
Okay,
SWYER.
yeah, yeah,
But it's like you described. Someone has female genitalia, a uterus,
mm,
no ovaries.
okay,
Their breasts don't usually come in on time,
yeah,
let's say in puberty,
yeah,
or as full, that kind of thing. They tend to be infertile, although they can carry a baby if, say, you use IVF,
mm.
right? So, although they can't get pregnant naturally on their
Oh,
own,
I see,
they
yeah,
can carry the baby. They do have a uterus,
yep,
but they have this XY chromosome. But I'm glad that the conversation has taken place because for the last few years, especially from the religious standpoint, it's been, look, God made man and woman. That's it. So, you know, if you go down to, and I've heard people say, if you go down to the delivery room today and a baby comes out,
mm-hmm.
yep, there's a vagina or a penis. That is what it is. And then what are you going to do? The kid gets to be, 13 years old, says, I don't feel like a girl. I don't feel like a boy. And now all of a sudden they're going to have some sort of a sex change. And people are just outraged by all this,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you just described that exact situation with this person.
No, I didn't.
You didn't.
No,
You said, wait a minute
hang
now.
on.
You said she was born a girl, raised as a girl, and
Yeah.
and the doctors, nobody knew until,
Yeah.
7, 8, maybe 12
Yeah.
years old. And then the doctors go, hey, you know what? You've got these chromosomes,
Uh-huh.
you know.
I'm not saying that's not how I described it, but I'm saying what I described in the situation with this boxer is not the majority of the conversation we're having around what is the trans movement.
Yeah, I get that. I get that totally.
This would, I mean, I guess people might include it, but this would be like the vast Caliph doesn't. I've never heard Caliph identify as transgender. I've never heard that
Sure, sure.
that
But
Caliph identify.
what would you say if she said, I remember I was about 12 years old and I was like, Mom, I don't feel like a girl. I feel like a boy.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and obviously it happens. I would
Right.
say, what does it feel like to be a boy? What does it
Right.
feel like to be a girl?
Well, I feel like she might say, I feel like I'm more powerful. I feel like I'm
Okay.
probably more aggressive. All the girls seem sweet and timid and,
Yeah.
da, 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 and I don't feel that way. I feel rough and tumble. I feel a little bit more domineering.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm more aggressive and I'm ready to.
So I would say that why do you feel that, and we're doing a little role play here. Why do you feel that women cannot have those traits? Why do you feel like
Sure. Sure.
somebody that feels
Yeah.
those traits can't be? Man, I think about frontier families all the time.
Frontier
Yeah, like
families.
families on the frontier, like when America was moving west. And
Okay.
I think about that's kind of my measuring stick sometimes when I think about how hard my life is.
Okay.
Like I'm out there cutting the grass, I'm getting frustrated because I'm hitting sticks and jumping up. And I'm like, man, what if we were living on the frontier? Like, how hard would life be?
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
like how good. That's often my viewpoint or like my anchor to remind myself how convenient life is for me today.
Well, I
So
feel like people like this athlete.
yeah,
Uh, it's like a frontier. I mean, I feel like in this conversation, we're at that now, right?
well,
Because I honestly feel like 50 years from now, 60 years from now, we'll have this figured out,
mhm,
right? They used to play football in leather helmets with no face mask,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And people had a lot more injuries and a lot more brain traumas and
mhm.
all kind of stuff, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
and
yeah,
now we've figured it out. Everything that happens, we say, look, let's not let that happen again. Let's put some safeguards in
mhm,
place. And right now, somebody's coming up. They say, "Man, I really enjoy boxing." Okay, well, you're built
yeah,
like a man, and you hit like a man, and you have all these characteristics that
yeah.
make me feel like you ought to be fighting dudes. And they go, "Well, except this vagina," you know. So, and then the conversation, "Oh, vagina. Well, you're clearly in the woman's camp." And
Yeah.
then they get in there and dominate women, and even the women are like, "Hey, that's not natural, right there,"
Mhm.
And from the religious, God made man, woman,
Well,
that's it.
I don't think this is necessarily uh I don't think I'm even making a religious argument here. I mean, I agree s- sporting associations shouldn't make rules over how you can compete based on genitalia. I don't think that there's evidence to say that the presence of a particular genitalia is the reason that you're able to hit harder.
All right, so
Um,
look, I'm gonna come direct because this is how we tend to communicate between us.
okay.
Did God make
Oh,
does
okay. So
God
that's
make only men and women?
yes,
And that's it.
yes. But then there are
So
abnormalities. But this is we're changing we're going off path here. So we can have that conversation, but let's finish this Caliph discussion first
okay,
for this sporting event.
okay,
So I'm saying that this is not necessarily a religious argument, and that I wouldn't make, and I'm not aware that anybody has made rules based on where you can compete based on the presence of genitalia. That's not what the boxing associations did that disqualified Caliph. But Caliph being born with XY chromosomes, as far as I know, would have the benefits of male testosterone, bone structure, went through male puberty.
why do you say male puberty?
Male puberty,
Yeah, why do you say went through male puberty?
because the male and female bodies develop different during puberty. So I'm saying that would be accompanied by an increase in testosterone. When I say so, going through male puberty, males that go through puberty experience an increase in testosterone that females that go through puberty do not. So I'm saying male puberty, that's a
Okay.
factor here because that's an athletic advantage.
Hmm.
And we've recognized, I mean, that's why we have men's and women's sports differently. So because,
Obviously, it gives me pause when you have somebody with female genitalia going through it, and when I hear you say went through male puberty, I'm like, wait a minute.
because what I'm getting to is that the ultimate case here, or the ultimate issue, is that Caliph has the advantage of male athletic traits
Sure, sure,
that would generally give Caliph an advantage over someone that doesn't. Now, I'm not saying that Caliph's never lost to
sure.
a female, because I know that Caliph has. Um, but as a rule for a professional sporting associations,
Mhm.
it makes sense to me that we would say that somebody that is equipped with male advantages cannot compete against females that traditionally do not.
Yeah. And I don't really have any, I mean, to be honest, very little interest in how they end up sorting it out.
Mhm.
To me, I'm much more interested in the fact that this conversation is taking place at all, which is, oh, so now we have somebody that born a girl, raised a girl,
Mhm.
but with male chromosomes.
What do you mean born a girl?
At birth, had female genitalia. If you were
But I
there when that baby's delivered,
uh-huh.
at all appearances would say clearly a girl.
Appearances would say.
Sure.
The doctors thought. Just on
Yeah.
the external said. But
Mhm.
really, Caliph was male.
Mm.
I mean, like, if
So
they dug up
so to be clear,
500 years
so
from now,
now males can have vaginas.
yeah, it's possible.
Wow, and uteruses.
Um,
And bear a child if
oh,
in vitro fertilization. So you could have a
I don't
pregnant male.
I don't know about uteruses and the ability to birth.
Well, that's what
Or
Swyer syndrome. You have female
Mhm.
genitalia, uterus without ovaries usually, so they're infertile. So yeah, you could have by your definition, you could have a pregnant male.
I don't know about that syndrome. I'd have to look into it
Okay.
further.
All
But
right.
I mean,
Well, what do you think about? So you said a male can be born with a vagina.
yeah. No, so what's interesting here is I haven't set any standards based on physical genitalia. I haven't said anything about that. You said some things about that in terms of somebody having it in sporting
So
associations.
you think it
I'm
all
not-
boils down to the chromosomes?
that seems to be the most significant factor. Yeah.
So
So if we were to dig up if somebody were to find Caleb's bones 1,000 years from now, or I don't even know if the bones would be around that far, but
mhm,
you know, and they took those bones into a laboratory,
mhm,
what conclusion would they come to? You think?
hmm.
We do this with Viking. We dig up we find some Viking grave or
Yeah,
something,
yeah,
and then we say, "Oh, she was a warrior princess,
yeah, yeah.
probably because of."
Well, I'm thinking about the pelvic area mainly because birth canal. So I guess
Yeah.
I'm no expert. I'm not a
No,
scientist.
it's a hard to.
I would tend toward female, but I get
Uh,
what you're saying also about bone structure, about
they would look at DNA. I think DNA would probably determine that
yeah.
it's XY chromosomes. And I think they would come to the conclusion this was a male.
What if they said this is an unusual case because the pelvis is female, but the DNA and chromosomes are male?
I would say then it would be a male that had an unusually shaped pelvis.
Hmm. Okay. And even though we've just concluded that a male can be born with a vagina.
Well, I did not conclude that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Well, no, I guess I did. I would say that Kelif is an example of this. Kelif would be the prime example. I mean, we're all talking about that right now. Where it was biologically male,
Mm-hmm.
and had the outward appearance of being female, and so the doctors made an assessment. Again, if this is the case for Kelif, I don't really know. But it was not evident that this person or Kelf or whoever was actually male until the puberty years start coming around. And,
Sure.
and I was reading some paper about it or something and said that this is the case for DSD.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that's you don't even know is going on at birth until much later in life.
Right. So if a young girl said, "Man, something doesn't feel right," they test and they determine you actually have male chromosomes. How would you feel then about hormone therapies? How would you feel about a sex change operation?
So before we get into that, do we agree that we're talking about like this is not the wide majority of the trans movement that we're talking about here? Like this is a fringe issue.
I don't know that I'd necessarily. For instance, we had a trans person come to our event not long. And by the way, the opposite of this Swyer syndrome, in other words, if there was a person born that had male genitalia but female chromosomes, right? That also happens. It's called Klinefelter syndrome, right? So this happens in both directions, right?
Sure.
We had a trans person that came to one of our Conco events.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say that person who I think by most appearances, I would say that do you think that person was raised a boy, but was now transitioned into a woman? I
Uh,
think I'm correct in that, right?
yeah, I think they were identifying as a woman.
Yeah. Okay. So born a born a boy, according to all appearances, raised a boy, and then at some point said, "I think something's wrong." What if there was a test that she had said, "You know what? Turns out I've got female chromosomes." I always knew I felt a little bit different than all the other boys, and now she was undergoing the process of actually changing over to her to better match her chromosomes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what percentage of the cases are like that. I don't run across that many trans people in my day to day.
Yeah.
I run across this
Well,
controversy, and I run across this.
yeah, because I mean, I think what's going on with the Olympics and the boxing this week is exacerbated by the overall.
Mhm,
Again, like we're talking about the flashpoint in our culture right now
right.
has impacted this discussion about boxing.
Yeah, you've got all these conversations, thousands and thousands of posts, but we're talking about one person or two people.
One person or two people in the Olympic event, and it's probably the same reason that the Last Supper thing was so big because the Olympics is the world stage. So
Sure,
there have
sure.
been other issues where biological males are competing in women's sports. These are there's dozens of these instances now, but they're not quite on the same level as the Olympics, which has the whole world captivated.
Right.
So there is
I
it
mean,
is
there
a cultural issue that's got to be addressed. And then when an event like this happens, not it's easy to rush to conclusions here, but like I said, that Caleb is not somebody that identifies as transgender, as far as I know.
sure.
It's not quite the same, but I think it's kind of getting lumped in that same conversation. And that same conversation is um, people that have the advantages of male traits should not be competing in the same sports leagues as people with female
Mhm.
traits. To me that's not necessarily a religious argument.
I guess what I'm getting at, and this is what I'm kind of pressing at, is people that are on one side of this argument. I don't think you're going to please them. In other words, hey, look, um, you're a woman, you're born with a vagina,
Mhm.
case closed. You got to do girl stuff. Fine. She goes over there, she dominates, right? And then
That's not my argument. Okay, all right.
okay,
I just wanted to say
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not making that
She
argument.
goes over there, she dominates, right? Hey, wait a minute, you've got male chromosomes. You're a biological male.
Uh-huh.
Fine, okay, then I'll go through the other operations to fit my. Wait a minute, you can't do that either. We don't want you having sex change operations. We don't want you having hormone therapy. We don't want you having. How do they how do they win? What's the road for them to go?
I don't know. I think we're murkying the waters here by bringing
Okay,
in different conversations to different things. Horm- we're raising the questions of like hormone therapy or what if this person. So you gave an example a minute ago of somebody that what did you say was raised a girl and they realized they're male. Like should they then so they've lived 14 years as female and then they realize they've got XY chromosomes. Should they then go back and change the way that they've been raised to a boy? That's a good ethical question. Um, and generally, as far as I understand, people that are born intersex or that have DSD usually have lived and do live life as one sex or one particular gender. It's not something that they transition to later. That's why I think it's not really the same as the overall issue of trans or hormotherapy or
right. But we're in Nashville.
Mhm.
Vanderbilt Hospital
Yeah.
was right here,
Yeah.
and there was a huge controversy a few years ago because they were doing hormone therapy and
To who?
to underage people.
Yeah, to children. Yeah.
Right, right. So, like you said, this person was born a girl, raised a girl, and got to be 7 or 8, 10 years old, 12 years old. And
Uh-huh.
then they found out the chromosomes are XY,
Yeah.
you know, to what do you
So
do to help
I
that?
will answer.
How do you help
I'll
that
answer that question.
person?
But again, you got to realize we got to agree on this.
Okay.
This is the fringe here. That's
It,
do
but
you
how do
do
we
you
know?
do
But
you
how do
th-
we know that?
but
How do you just assert that this is the fringe?
because
What
it's
if it's,
not it's
how
not
do,
what the trans movement is advocating for.
how do you know it's not
Gary,
50%?
do you think that most kids that were getting hormone treatment at Vanderbilt or wherever are suffering from DSD or that other syndrome? Because if they were, I think that would be the conversation that we're having. But we're not really having that conversation until a boxer who does have this disorder is now relevant to is now in the spotlight, a part of the conversation.
Look,
The
I'll concede this much. I'll concede that it's a possibility that it's the fringe. It's also a possibility
Mhm.
that this represents 70 or 80% of trans cases. And then there's other few people that are just like, you know what? I'm sick of being a boy. I'm going to go be a girl.
Well, I wouldn't even
I
call
could
it.
see, I could see that also
But if Kelef doesn't call it a trans, if he doesn't call himself trans, why would we?
because he hasn't made a move yet. He
Oh,
hasn't
he's
taken
24
actions.
years old or something,
Right, right.
and as
If
the
he if
tra-
he got to be if she got to be 30 and said, you know what? I'm tired of living with male chromosomes but female
yeah,
parts. So I'm gonna change out some parts here.
yeah.
And then I guess
That is that is I
would you then
agree.
consider
That is a hard ethical question.
would you then consider that person trans?
If Caliph was having surgery that would align with their biological, oh, I would say their biological sex, like their
Mhm.
chromosomes.
Yeah.
No, that is based on what I understand from the trans movement itself.
Right?
And I just don't know. I mean, I say trans movement. I don't know what a better term to call it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, that does not line up with that. With that, that's somebody saying, "Hey, my body, I actually have a physical disorder, a physical ailment, however you want to call it, and I'm going to have a surgery to better align with the biological reality of my sex." That is not the same conversation that we're having. And I would say to your question about, how do we know what number of kids? And I would say it can't be the majority because that's not the conversation that's being pushed. Excuse me, uh, on the national stages, like on Dr. Phil, when they go on and have different people hash this out. Vanderbilt itself is not coming out and saying, "Hey guys, listen, we're doing this gender clinic, we're administering chromosomes for kids, but we're doing it because the majority of these kids are born with this physical disorder." They're not saying that. And I think if those were the majority of cases, that's the case that Vanderbilt would have. But instead, Vanderbilt shuts down their operation. And I feel like they wouldn't have done that, or you know what I'm saying? I think that would have been an important factor from the gender clinics and things like that, like Vanderbilt. But
Mm.
because it's not, I think it's reasonable for me to assume that's not the majority of cases.
Hmm. I don't know. I mean,
It's a hard thing, man. It is.
I don't think that Vanderbilt would just take a bunch of boys with male chromosomes, with male features,
Mm.
and just say, "Oh, you don't feel like being a boy anymore, and you just want to change and be a girl. Okay, we'll do that."
Well, based
I
on
don't
what I've
think that would be
well,
the
based on what
case.
I've heard, they'll
I mean, they're a
say,
hospital. They treat conditions,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and so
So do you think that gender dysphoria or someone that identifies as trans, is that a condition? And then how is it diagnosed? It's diagnosed based around feelings, right? Like,
yeah,
hey,
but
I've
you're calling all trans people they're having a mental illness of some sort.
isn't that what you said?
No
You said that the doctors treat what? Conditions, disorders, right?
conditions.
Oh, so okay.
Yeah.
So if somebody says I was born in the wrong body, would that not be a disorder? Or I was born in a body that doesn't line up with my gender? Wouldn't that isn't I mean DSD, that's the scientific definition of what Kelf is dealing with. Differential sex no, it doesn't say disorder, it's differential sex diagnosis. But it's not I mean, that seems to be a disorder, right? So somebody say I was born in the wrong body, which I don't know if they use that language anymore. It's certainly been thrown around. But to say my biological body doesn't line up with like I'm actually a male. I was born in
What if they said I was born with a vagina, but I got male chromosomes, and that makes it pretty weird and it's uncomfortable for me?
yeah. No, I empathize with that. That's
Is
Kelly's.
that not the same thing as saying I'm born in the wrong body?
No, it is not the
That's
same.
not the
It's
same.
not the same because as far as I understand, I mean, correct me here, Gary. The trans movement does not seem to be concerned with chromosomes. And
I
like
don't know that.
when people throw out the question, like it's indefinable. The question, and we don't have to get into this, but like, what is a woman? Why that's such a controversial question is because culture today, or a large swath of it, is saying you can't define what that is. Like you can't put guardrails around it because it's the moment that you do, you're now excluding someone.
Oh yeah.
And if someone wants to identify as a woman or female, then it's permissible for them to do so.
Well, it's the reason why it's challenging is because how would you define it? Well, a woman is somebody that can have a kid. Okay, well, what do you do with all the women that can't have kids? You know,
Yeah.
a woman is somebody with uh, breast. Okay, well, what do you do with all the women without breasts? You know,
hmm
um, so
And
yeah,
I wouldn't make the argument that way.
right. What would you make it as? Chromosomes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
That seems to be the most consistent. I would simply define a woman as an adult human female.
right.
And then there are deviations, there are abnormalities, there are.
And according to that definition, and what we're seeing right now, a male can be born with a vagina.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because
Okay.
I would say, as far as I know, it seems that
And a uterus.
sure,
Yeah.
you can have
And if that person goes in and says,
human beings have 2 arms, right?
yeah,
And they have 5 fingers on each hand.
generally, most times,
Generally. But sometimes there are cases where somebody is born with a hand that doesn't have the same amount of fingers, right?
Mhm.
But we would still say human beings have 5 fingers.
See, I feel like that's all the trans movement is looking for, is when the religious people say, God made man and woman.
Uh-huh.
If you would just say, generally. Now, he does make there's in-betweens. There's people born that we're not really sure. You might have a male born with a vagina. And if that person grows up and they're
Yeah,
uncomfortable and they say, hey man, maybe I want to change out some parts to where I'm more aligned with my chromosomes. Now you guys have a problem with it also.
Now, I would be more open to it if somebody said, I want to change out some parts to more align with my biological sex, my biological reality. But I'm not making the argument that you're suggesting in terms of, because I've got this genitalia, that means, or because I can have children, then that means I'm female. Because it's problematic to define it that way, like,
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah.
But it seems to be the most consistent is around your biological your chromosomes, that determine these other traits. I mean, the way your body develops, and there can be, in rare cases, abnormalities in physical development. Like, for sure.
I mean, you know that even with chromosomes, right? It's not just XX or XY,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
There's many other variations in there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's in other birth defects or birth disorders, there are issues with chromosomes where there's extra chromosomes and that result in things like, and I'm overstepping what I can really know here, but the things of like autism and Down syndrome
Mhm.
are tied back to
Mhm.
issues with chromosomes,
Right.
right? But how many fingers do human beings have? 5.
Yeah, generally.
We would say if we weren't having this specific discussion, we would
Right.
just say they've got 5.
Right.
Now there are definitely exceptions and
Right.
reasons and things that
And I agree that 98% of people, let's say, fit into the XX or XY boxes.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like all the other side, the opposition is saying is, hey guys, that's not the only 2 boxes. There's people born, and they're people too, in these other states.
I think what we hear is that there is no box. There is no box.
Ah,
You cannot define it. And therefore, if somebody wants to compete and they identify as a woman and they want to identify or they want to compete in women's sports, we ought to let them, because there ought to be no box. And we have recognized that the box is important. Now, there are, why do we have actors and actresses competing in different categories? That's an interesting question. Sports, I think it's very obvious why we have boxes set up.
yeah.
But when we want to,
I mean, I do too.
but
I
when we
mean,
want to advocate that there are no boxes.
I feel like it's the same reason why we have weight classes. It's the same reason why we have different disciplines.
Yeah,
we
I agree with that.
we don't put a boxer in there with a mixed martial artist,
Yeah.
unless they're going to both agree that, hey, we're going to do this particular sport today.
I agree with that, and we've set that up so that men can succeed in their events, and so that women can succeed also.
Right.
Because as a general group,
Where does this person succeed?
That's the hard thing. I
Right.
empathize. This man, look, like I said in the beginning, Kelly, I can't imagine the difficulties that
Right.
come with living with something like that. But
Right.
I don't want to set policies around sporting associations, and since we're talking about this specifically, to make accommodations for that when it's going to potentially suffer the group.
Right.
We do the best we can.
You mentioned something a few times. We're going to change.
Okay, let's do it. We've been hashing.
Yeah.
We've been going. We went deep on that one.
Yeah. So you mentioned something a couple of times. Legislation. You wouldn't pass legislation to do this or that or the other. Did you hear about the recent thing in Mount Juliet?
I don't remember. You have to
Okay.
remind me.
Mount Juliet recently passed a resolution
Okay.
to make, and you might clarify for me if I'm off, to make, I think, the month of July a month of prayer and fasting
Okay.
and to recognize God as, um, help me bringing it up. Um, yeah, so they basically made this thing to make July, like I said, a month of prayer and fasting. The resolution really does nothing. I mean, it's not
Sure.
like
They
there's
do.
any
Politicians do that all the time, like
right.
National Day of Prayer or something. It's pretty inconsequential.
It is, but they've recently got some heat from the Freedom from Religion
Okay.
Foundation
All right.
saying that it was unconstitutional, and you can't, um, you are to make no laws regarding Creator and the King of all glory,
Okay.
month of prayer and fasting.
That to me, that sounds pretty specific. Like you would hear that and be like, oh, yeah, that's a Christian that would say that.
Right. So, what do you think of a city council doing this while also in their district, the people they're supposed to be representing
Mhm.
may have Muslims, Buddhists, Hindu, non believers? Are you
Mm,
representing all those people? Are you in
yeah.
favor of government
Yeah.
on a national, local government being able to do those types of
Yeah. I do
things?
not think that secularism is the only worldview that the government should be able to express. So I don't have a problem with a government, a body of elected individuals expressing a view that would reflect a Christian worldview.
Hang on a second. Secularism being the only worldview.
Yeah.
So when they say that the speed limit down this road will be, are they expressing a secular worldview?
No, I mean, not necessarily.
How are they? How in any other way do they
Yeah.
express secular worldviews?
So when you would put a group together and say you cannot make any religious expressions or you cannot make a proclamation or whatever that would call, to me that most reflects secularism. We're going to create laws, we're going to create rules for a society, but it's going to be without theism in view. So to me, that seems very similar to secular humanism, right? We're gonna create a system, and you'll probably be able to define it better than me. A system of living that promotes the most human flourishing, most good for society. And to me, that sounds like what you would probably expect a legislative body to do. And so I would say I don't think, now I'm not a constitutional scholar, but that the founders had in mind that our governments would not be able to operate, like to do prayers in the legislative sessions or make a proclamation about day of prayers or declare God to be the King of glory. Um, that's not compelling anyone to behave in a certain way. And I also don't think it's a bad thing for our legislative bodies to express the Christian worldview in those ways. So
Hmm.
that's kind of a long answer, but
So would you say that the same city council could say that creation ought to be taught in schools and not evolution?
hmm. So that's kind of like the next level deeper. I don't know, Gary. I don't know about that. I don't know if I would say they could not teach evolution in the same way I would say they could. I wouldn't prohibit them certainly from teaching biblical creation either.
Do you think that they ought to
I
teach?
think that schools would be very bad at teaching biblical interpretations.
What about in science class?
Yeah.
In science class, when they say, "How did the Earth get here?" and the kid asks, "How did the Earth get here?" Is the science teacher supposed to give them your creation story or a natural explanation?
I think the science teacher should teach science, and I wouldn't prohibit either view. So we have credentialed scientists that are proponents of young Earth creation, and they publish papers and they get on the debate stage. And would you say that they should not be allowed to teach a science class? I mean, somebody that's got a degree from biology from Harvard, would you say they are unqualified to teach a science class?
No, I wouldn't say that. I should.
Okay.
I would just say they should teach science and not any religious. If you want to have, if someone wants
I
to have various religious views, Hinduism, Buddhism, various creation myths from
uh-huh.
different cultures, fine. We have a religion class right down the hall. We go into, astrology,
But why
all
is
kind of
but
stuff.
why is your worldview the only permissible worldview in the classroom? Because
Wait a
it,
minute. Wait a minute. Right. So in theater class, they could teach theater. In
Mhm.
law class, they could teach law. In
Yeah,
science class, they can teach science. And in
right.
religion class, if someone wants to take that, they can teach religion. and they can teach them everything. They teach them about the zodiac if they want to. They
Yeah.
can teach them about Greek gods and that Zeus is throwing lightning down out of the cloud. They teach them all
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't I don't mind that, you
Okay.
know, um,
So if
in that class,
Mhm.
right? But I don't want the science teacher to tell them that Zeus creates lightning, right? That is a bad thing. And when they say, "Well, how old are human beings? How old is our species?" And if the science teacher says, about 6,000 years," now I think you're doing that kid a disservice.
Okay,
That's where I draw the line.
I understand that,
If you
but
wanna
we
have
have
whatever myths,
but think about what I
whatever
said. We
stories.
have credentialed scientists, credentialed from the most prestigious universities, astrophysicists, molecular biologists, now that do hold to the young Earth view. Now, I'm not saying in the science
Yeah,
field.
but that just
Well,
like
hang
you
on, hang on, hang on.
that's their hobby. They're not publishing
Oh,
papers. They're not
yes, they are. Yes, they
yeah,
are. Hang on,
in
man.
their own
Hang
journals.
on, hang on, hang on. Well, I'll tell you why that is too. But you're saying, look,
It's conspiracy theory.
you it's not a conspiracy, Gary. Hang on, it's happened. We've got scientists at the most credentialed levels, and you're saying that's not science. Therefore, somebody with a degree in molecular biology from Harvard shouldn't be able to teach in a science classroom because they don't agree with your conclusion. Let me ask you this: what is science?
It's a process.
I agree.
So, it's
Okay,
it's a process and how you come to conclusions. That's when you're doing
sure.
science.
Usually, it's like repeatable
Yeah, and some of the
experiments.
other
Yeah,
parts of it are
repeatable, predictable conclusions. Kind
when
of
you
thing.
have an idea, when you have a hypothesis, and then you test it.
Now, I might agree with you.
Before it's regarded as legitimate, it's put up for peer review. Everybody
Mhm.
else tries to poke holes in it.
Yeah,
Sees where your calculations were wrong or things that you've overlooked, or
yeah.
it's a very strenuous process before we accept something as okay. Now we know that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I might agree with you that in the science classroom, they shouldn't be teaching, "Hey, this is how we interpret Genesis."
Hmm.
I agree. But I don't think there are things that should be prohibited from a science classroom to say that the scientific evidence of our universe necessarily points back to an intelligent mind. That's an argument from science. And I would say I would not prohibit that. And that there has been biases in this.
Say that again.
That the evidence in our world, the scientific evidence in our world necessitates an intelligent mind, like an intelligent creator. Could be God. It could be, I know you're going to disagree with this, but I'm not saying what that intelligent mind is, but this is like, Dr. Stephen Meyer is.
That's
He's
totally false.
okay.
That's
Well, that's fine.
totally
That's
false.
fine. You can disagree, but there
Just
is an,
because we don't understand something, this is my problem.
well,
This is
hang
the
on.
okay.
And so they make a scientific argument, and they're not saying it's Yahweh.
It's not a scientific argument.
They're making a scientific argument. They're not saying it's Yahweh, it's Allah, it's aliens or some other dimension. They're just saying the observable evidence necessitates, based on our human experience, the existence of intelligence mind behind our universe. Now, they make this argument from science, and you can disagree with it, Gary. You can think it's bad, it's wrong, but to them prohibit it from the science classroom, I think you're showing a bias towards your worldview. And that's why when I said in the beginning, but why is secularism the only worldview this should be expressed? I think that's what you're doing in that situation.
No, not at all.
Okay.
That's not a scientific that statement that essentially says the universe is so complex that it must have been created by a mind, right?
That's not what I
That
said.
yeah, essentially. I mean, that's not essentially what you said.
I said the observable evidence is it's consistent with the necessity of an intelligent mind. So that what that means is, and we had
Let me ask you this. I want to make sure this is what we do. We call each other out sometimes on things.
hit me with it.
Okay. I want to make sure that you're not parroting, right?
Okay.
In other words, you've heard a thing.
Oh,
and now
sure,
I'm just going to
sure,
repeat
sure.
that thing, right?
Yeah.
So to me,
Well, I am repeating what would generally be the case with what is intelligent design, like proponents of just the theory of intelligent design.
right. So you said the evidence suggests a mind,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I hear that. I think about it. I internalize it, and I say, okay, what that's saying is the universe is so complex that it had to be created by somebody. It had to be created by a mind.
Yeah.
I'm saying the same thing, right?
Kind of. I didn't use the term so complex. I mean, snowflakes can be complex, right? A pattern in a snowflake. And yet
Right, but the
it's
universe is well, obviously what I'm saying is the universe is much more complex than a
yeah,
snowflake.
yeah, sure. Yeah,
Snowflakes are a part of it,
we could
but
agree on that just for the sake of
you know,
conversation. Yeah.
yeah, that's an argument from ignorance, and it's an argument from incredulity. It's just
An
I can't.
argument for ignorance.
Yeah, I can't see any other way how all this would have happened, and so therefore, and this is my big problem. This is almost the God of
Okay.
the gaps.
Oh,
Science
okay.
science says, look, we know A, we know B, we know C, we know D, and we can go many many levels deep, right? But we get to a point where it's just like the kid asking why this and why that, why that. We get to a point where science says, we don't know that yet. We're working on it, but we don't know that one yet. And I feel like religious people say, right, that's that's where God fits in, and they throw God into those. We don't know why lightning is coming from the sky.
Yeah.
There's a God, and we do that. Well, then when we know that, then and this is the God of the gaps. That the more we know, that we keep closing up these little areas, but the religious people still want to put God in those areas. We know A, we know B, we know C. We all get all the way down. Well, we don't know this.
Yeah.
That's where the religious say, therefore God.
Do we know how life comes from non-life?
We're still working on
And
it.
so, but you're confident science will be able to naturally
Well, we know.
describe it?
So we know a lot about. We know
There's a
a
lot we
great
know.
deal about it.
There's a lot we know. But you're confident that science will come to a natural explanation on how life comes from non-life?
Absolutely.
Science of the gaps. You just assume that science is going to be able to explain it. Like when Darwin came out with his theory of evolution, he believed that cells were just simple. He didn't understand the complexity of the cells. And I agree with you. We have made incredible discoveries on how life operates, especially on the cellular and molecular level and genetic code, since Darwin's time and now. But what we thought would be a few steps from here, we've actually gotten further away as we've come to a better understanding of how complex life really is. So
Mhm.
I agree that there's stuff we've learned.
What aided in that understanding, religion or science?
Science, they're not competing principles. I would say that's
I think they very much
that's
are.
your bias, Gary.
I'm fine with that. I do have a bias
Because
against religion.
historians will agree that it was the Christian worldview, and I brought this up in one of our Conco events, that drove the scientific revolution for that 400-year period or so around, 1500 to, or not maybe not 400, but 1500 to 17, 1800 or so around there. That it was the Christian worldview that propelled science forward. So religion and science are not these competing
It
odds.
wasn't the Christian worldview, it was the Christian checkbook. That's where the money was. So
No,
if you're gonna look, if you've got a population out there, and
no.
who's gonna have the money and the time and the resources to go investigate these things, where that's where the money is. That's who is controlling
I
everything.
think it's so interesting when we talk about people do you know that 60-70% of Nobel Prize winners have been Christian? Are they all as corrupt and just taking money from the church like you would assume these other scientists are?
No, but
Okay, all right. No, they're not. But that's not the argument I'm making. What I'm saying about the Christian worldview and the scientific revolution is that Christianity uniquely gave them a reason and purpose and a framework for understanding the universe in a way that wasn't around before. So before that, you had advancements in science, but usually it was around practicality. Like, oh, we can use gunpowder for this, or oh, we can use this tool to help us build this thing. But what was unique about the scientific revolution that really rocketed, no pun intended, science forward was that that God has equipped us with a rational mind to understand a reasonable and ordered universe. And because of the Christian worldview, I have a reasonable expectation that tomorrow is going to be like today, and I can rationally understand it. And the atheistic worldview doesn't afford that for anybody. But Europe became Christian. It came out of paganism around the year 1000. It grew and grew and became more Christian. And then it started driving the scientific discoveries through that. I've got a rational mind, and I want to understand, not for practical purpose of building a better hammer or something, but I just want to understand how the universe works. And God has given that to us to discover, given us a mind to discover it. That was totally unique about Christianity. And that is what rocketed science forward during the scientific revolution. It's not been until the last, 100 years or so where people have started to say, oh, science and religion, they're totally incompatible, or,
Yeah.
guys just did it back then because they were afraid of the church. I mean, how little do we, not that you didn't say that, but people have said that before, how little do we have to think of the scientists that preceded us to form those opinions?
What, like how negative an opinion we must have of
I
them?
think people
Is
think
that what you're saying?
not necessarily you, but just people in general, and I can be guilty of this too, of thinking so little of humans in history.
Mm.
God, they're just and I do this with, like, Israelites in the Bible, like, "Oh, man, they just witnessed this miracle, and yet they go on and build a golden calf." Dude, like, what a bunch of idiots.
Yeah, a bunch of illiterate goat
Yeah,
herders.
I'm like, "Gosh," and I'm guilty of that too, and I say, "Hang on, I I probably would have reacted the same way that they did in this situation, and that people 1,000 years ago, um, are just as smart as I am." Now they are what we know about science certainly has accumulated, but I just think as humanity in general, we just have this view that, like, our generation has figured it out and nobody has been as smart as us.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's right.
Hmm. I
Sorry,
don't.
I talk for a lot there.
That's okay. That's okay. I don't know if I've thought a lot about that. I do feel like we're obviously a lot more intelligent. It does build on the shoulders of those that came before us.
Mhm.
Um, I do feel like the generations that come after will be smarter than us and stand on our shoulders.
I don't know if I'd say
So I feel like
maybe I wouldn't say smarter than us. I get why you're saying that, but,
it's an accumulation. Once we see how our grandparents and their parents solved problems, and
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
identify the problems in how they solve problems, then we don't solve problems in that way.
Yeah,
We get better and better and
yeah,
better.
our discoveries today are definitely built on the discoveries from yesterday.
Sure.
And but I just
And but I think not just the discoveries,
Mhm.
our way of thinking, our methods of problem solving, because we're able to look back and see what mistakes they made, why they made them, were they short sighted, were they prejudiced, were they bigoted, were they, sexist, were they, and it
Mhm.
caused all these problems. Okay, fantastic. Moving forward, how about we not be sexist, not be bigoted, not be prejudiced, not be, and so we actually make decisions in better fashion as the species moves forward. So does that mean that we're smarter than the previous generation? I think to some degree, possibly, yeah.
Okay. But some of that was morality, and we initially started off by talking about science, and I definitely would say that, you know, we progress through morals. It's possible to say, "Hey, we are a more moral people now than we were 1,000 years ago." I think generally that's true for the Western civilizations. I'm optimistic and say I think the world is generally better off than it was 1,000, 2,000 years ago.
Well, and I also
Um,
think that our early ancestors had a tendency to assign agency to things that they didn't understand. And what
mhm.
I mean by that was like I've said, I don't understand why the lightning is
Yeah.
coming out of the sky. So we'll assign agency there. The next thing you
Mhm.
know, we've got Zeus,
Yep.
and I don't understand this thing. And so we'll attribute that to some figure.
Yeah.
I do hope that as we move forward, we'll grow out of that,
Yeah.
you know.
I think we've done a pretty good job of it. I think it's interesting
I
when you
think
give that
that it still hangs on.
but when you give that example, you don't say, "I don't understand how the lightning works, therefore Jesus," because Christians don't make that argument. That's never been the argument of Christianity is that, "Hey, we don't understand how lightning works, therefore we need Jesus."
Well, just because we've moved away from polytheism onto monotheism, and now they're attributing anything that they can't understand to this specific God. Uh, it's like Hitchens used to say. I think it's progress because I think we're getting nearer the true figure all the time, and I hope that eventually we grow out of it
Yeah.
completely.
No, I do agree, like, that has been, the case for a lot of religions that we didn't explain how thunder so it was giants rolling bowling balls or
Hmm.
Thor beating his hammer, and, what is interesting, I was reading this week,
And still, you will have religious leaders today. Let's say an incredible tsunami hits a certain place or an earthquake. There
yeah.
will still be religious leaders today that will go out there and say, God spoke here.
Mm,
And God was trying to say this thing.
yeah,
These people were doing these things wrong, whatever it is they're opposed to. Maybe it
yeah,
was they were too sexual or they were whatever. And they will still attribute those natural
mm.
occurrences and say, God was sending a message to you here today.
Well,
And those are terrible
even if
things.
I would not agree with how they're prescribing that situation. I don't say things like that.
Hmm.
They probably wouldn't also negate the natural explanation of how a hurricane forms. I would assume. Maybe they would. I don't know.
Right.
They might just totally deny it.
I
But
don't know. So we got into this because we were talking about legislation.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow. We okay. Like an hour ago.
This
No, that felt
this
okay.
this, this tends to be how it goes.
I
Is
know.
that we go from one thing to the next? But so you don't think that a local government should pass a law like that?
A law like what?
A law that says that this township is going to recognize. It's a resolution. I
Yeah.
get that. recognizing God as the creator
Mhm.
and king of all glory
Yeah.
and this and that. Do you think that should be okay?
Yeah.
Really?
Of course.
What do you feel like they're still representing their Muslim, Buddhist, not constituents, citizens of their area that they're supposed to be representing that don't hold to those beliefs?
Uh,
You think they're still
no,
representing
they're
those
not.
people?
They're not representing beliefs that people that whose worldview is contrary to that. No,
Right,
that it's not representative of that.
right. Should those people pay tax dollars and then have those tax dollars spent to set up a nativity scene at Christmas outside of City Hall?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
So you should take. So it would be okay to take Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, non-believers tax money and use that to set up a nativity scene at their city hall.
Yeah, because I don't think that secularism is the only worldview that.
Do you think then?
So you probably wouldn't have a problem if a town hall or local government, whatever, got together and just said, "Hey, we're gonna proclaim a day of humanity, and we're just gonna promote doing good for the sake of humanity." Like that would probably be fine.
That seems to represent all of everybody. That's humanity.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
What?
but like you could put that under the secular humanism. Like we're celebrating the good of humanity. Again, that's why I'm saying I don't think that secularism is the only worldview that government gets to express. So
I don't think it's secularism.
so
I think it's human. I think it's, if anything, it would be speciesism. They're recognizing this species as they're not making it Dolphin Day
well
or
why
Monkey Month.
but is the only reason they don't do that because monkeys don't pay taxes. But if monkeys pay
That's a good
taxes,
question. That may very well be. I think you just nailed it. Yeah, yeah. All
Um,
these guys are paying the taxes.
so I thought a lot about this lately because Christian nationalism is what we're kind of edging up on here, and Christian nationalism is not a word that I've ever really been familiar with until recent years.
Mhm,
And I first started hearing it from people on the other side of me, and I was like, "What is this? What even is this Christian nationalism?"
mhm,
And there are different meanings to different people. There is this is going to might sound bizarre to those that have never heard of it, but there is a camp of Christians that have different views on the end times. So before we started recording, we were talking about Left Behind.
mhm,
Uh, Eschatology, which is the study of last things,
mhm.
is complicated. And generally Christians agree Jesus is coming back a second time. We better be ready.
Yeah, they're yearning for it.
Yeah.
They can't wait for it.
Can't wait for it.
The end of this world.
Well, and the reason is because that there will be no more death. There'll be no more sickness. That's what we're looking forward to.
Yeah.
There's still going to be an earth. There's still going to be an earth. The Bible talks about that.
So
But
when everybody's in heaven, they'll still be on earth?
everybody's not going to be in heaven. Or it talks about a new heaven, a new earth. We're going to live on a new earth in a way that that God had designed before the fall. But hang on, there's another big discussion. So that's one view of the end times is like the Left Behind. It's been the predominant view. There's another view where Christians think the world is going to become more and more Christian. So the Left Behind, I'll just call it the Left Behind view. The Left Behind view is that things are going to get worse and worse and worse. Then Jesus has come back. There's another view called postmillennialism that things are going to get better, 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 and better. More people in the world are going to become Christian till almost the whole world becomes Christian, and then Jesus will come back.
Hmm.
So there's different views there. Those guys have a theological view of Christian nationalism, and that say that we ought to Christianize the government. We ought to make laws that make blasphemy illegal, like the Last Supper, and that we're mandated, like the government is mandated to serve God in the same way like individuals are.
Hmm.
Now that's not me. That's not me. I'm not that kind of Christian nationalist. But I think to somebody, to a liberal or somebody on the left, I'm fine. Like they're probably going to call me a Christian nationalist, and I'm fine with that. I think that culturally, our nation has been Christian, really since its inception, and I don't have a problem with that. And neither has our institutions until recent times.
Okay. Well,
I
yeah.
can give you a reason. So this is interesting. There was a Supreme Court decision in 1892, I think it was, and it was called Holy Trinity versus the United States, ironically enough.
Mhm.
And it was a church that was trying to bring over they're trying to hire a pastor from England.
Mhm.
And there were some immigration laws or something that were getting in the way, and it made its way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in its final ruling, began their majority opinion by saying, as we are a Christian nation, here's our conclusion. And so it's not new to say that we are a culturally Christian nation. It's new to say that we ought not be. That's the new idea on the block.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Not really. I feel like this nation was expressly set up to avoid a repeat of what had happened
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree.
because where we were coming from, where we were leaving,
Uh-huh.
the head of the state was head of the church. It had been fraught
Yep.
for
Totally agree.
1,000 years with turmoil and conflict and different religious groups. And even when people began settling here and there was different states set up, it started to become, well, if you're not, if you're a Jew, you can't hold office here. And if you're not a Catholic, you can't hold office here. And we started down that same road
Yeah.
for a small period of time. And then finally we said, okay, we've got to do away with this. Let's get away from all this religious chaos and vitriol towards these different. Let's do away with that.
I agree that we set it up and we are trying to avoid something specific. And something else that I think it came up at a Conco event, but that like the King of England or the Queen of England, whoever is ruling over there, still to this day appoints the Archbishop of the Church of England. I think it might be more ceremonial these days, but the government still is directly linked to the Church of England. And so I definitely don't want an institution to be like the Church of America. Or
So you don't want a theocracy.
yeah, I don't want a theocracy, but
Okay.
but I will say that I'm okay with, and I think it's a good thing that our country and our government is culturally Christian. And so what I believe the founding fathers really were trying to get away from, and I think you were hitting it there, is that they didn't want the government to be in bed institutionally with the church body in the way that the Church of England is. So I don't want there to be like the Baptist Church of America and the government is appointing clergy and the clergy is
Or they didn't want to govern according to a certain religious view.
well,
they didn't want to be governed by Muslim law or Sharia or.
well, I agree that because I think they were coming from a majority Christian worldview.
I don't think they would want to be governed by Christian.
So why do you
laws either.
think? Then why do you think? Well, again, I said I agree. I don't think that I want to put anybody in jail for making a mockery of the Last Supper. Like
not about putting anybody in. Yeah, not about putting anybody in jail, but just governing by it, according to it. I don't think that should be.
So what worldview should we govern by? So what worldview should we pass? So we make moral law. Some people say, oh, you don't legislate morality, but that's just not true. I mean, we legislate morality all the time. I mean, murder is illegal, right? That's an issue of morality. What worldview is it permissible to legislate morality by?
What would you consider a democracy, or would you consider that a worldview?
Democracy? No, it's a political system.
A representative republic? Is that I don't know about.
Okay.
I don't know if I would govern according to any.
Let me think about. I think
worldview.
I get where you're going. If so, we're a democratic republic. We have a democratic system here of representation. If the population votes for laws that are in accordance with the worldview, do you have a problem with that? Let's say the majority of people voted for morality that reflected biblical morality or Christian morality. We got to that conclusion through the representative system, and it's what the legislative bodies that happen to be representatively Christian came to.
Yeah, I think I might have a problem with that if it was based on a theology or any religious, even if they came to the right conclusion, I might still have a problem with it.
Okay, so
in other words, I would have a problem with respect to everybody because my God says so. I've got a problem with that.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. So you agree with the conclusion, but not necessarily how they arrived.
Right. People can get to the right conclusion. Let's not abuse people. Let's treat everybody right. Let's help each other. But if you're saying because my God said to, well, that's where I have a problem. And if you want to do that personally on an individual level, if you feel like your God is telling you to be good to people and therefore you're good to people, fantastic. You do you. But I don't think that we should legislate based on that.
Yeah. And that's why I say that I don't think secular humanism is the only worldview that legislative bodies are allowed to express. Because if you strip away any theological outlook, what you're
I don't
let
think they've ever begun to express secular humanism.
well, so if didn't you just say it was called humanism? Before we got to the monkey things, it was oh no, you said speciesism or something like okay, secular speciesism. I don't think should be the only worldview that legislative bodies are allowed to
Yeah, I
express.
mean, at that point, I was just searching for a word to describe what you were.
I know,
you know.
I know. That was a good word.
But no, I don't think that you know, you're of the opinion that our country was set up as a Christian nation. Am I wrong?
Culturally Christian. So it was their Christian
Talking about the
worldview.
Constitution, the founding papers,
Constitution, the Pledge of Allegiance, our money,
yeah, all those things were added later. Under God,
right. No, I know it came
all that
later,
was
but
added
I'm
later.
saying like there was a waterfall that expressed that worldview, and I think that worldview was there from the beginning. I mean, it's the whole premise of where our rights came from, right? Our founding documents state that we are from a creator, and because we are from a creator, we have certain inalienable rights.
We were writing that to that was in our Declaration of Independence.
Right.
We were declaring our independence from this group over here that believed and governed based on all these things. So we were saying to those people, hey, we've got our rights.
Yep.
And this is what they are. And we're not going to be governed by you any longer. We were declaring to them freedom from them.
Yep.
So we took on their worldview and said, hey, you believe in all these things? Fantastic.
I heard
see what I'm saying?
You slipped in something you said. So we took on their worldview. So you were saying we were writing the Declaration of Independence in spite of their own worldview? I don't think
our
so.
Constitution is different than our Declaration of Independence.
Oh, it's different. It's different for sure.
Exactly.
It's for sure. But where did our founding fathers seem to agree on that where our rights come from? And then when Frederick Douglass, the slavery abolitionist, right? When he was a Christian, former slave, and he argued that, hey, we have not lived up to these founding documents, the founding principles of our nation. We've written a check that we have not cashed. And he was calling the nation to live up to the principles that we had been founded under and not lived up to.
Yeah. There's a whole series. There's a guy that did a study about this whole.
He's wrong. Just kidding.
Is America a Christian nation? I think I'm going to find that, and I'm going to track that down, and I'll share it with you.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
And we can go through it again. Well, look, Tim, we've been here for a couple hours. I hope that you're going to come in here again and again and again.
Oh, man, this was fun.
And argue things with me. Elliot and Pedro spend a lot of time in here, so I'm sure you'll be in here with those guys.
Sweet.
We're buddies, and I love getting together with you and going over these things. I love doing the Conversation Coalition events with you, and I consider you a friend of the show.
No, I appreciate it.
And so I hope to see you
this
back
has been fun.
times.
And what I wanted, I was like, man, I hope we have such a good time when we're at the cigar bar, you know. And I was like, I hope we can talk the same way. I was like, I hope I don't get nervous in the podcast studio and that I'm all stiff. Like I wanted to have the same kind of conversation.
I think you're awesome. I think you did great. And I think, it feels a little weird the first few minutes because you're hearing yourself. And then next thing you know,
forget about it.
We're just settled in and we're doing the same thing that we always do.
Cigar smoke comes back in the room.
Yeah. Smell of bourbon in the air. Cigars. Thank you very much, man.
Yeah, for sure, Gary. Thanks for having me, man.
Well, we're going to see you again.
Yeah.
All
Sweet.
right, buddy.
All right.
See you, man.